Hello, everybody. We are live in all of the places that is good to be alive. Hello, everybody watching on Facebook, on YouTube, or any other platform in which you're watching this. So, this is part of a series of conversations that I love to have with some wonderful colleagues and friends who I think you really need to know about. You need to know more of their message and what they do. So today I'm just really lovely and yummy to be interviewing Sangeeta Pillai, and she's a friend and colleague. I generally don't tend to interview people who I don't like as people as well. And at the same time, I've been following her podcast, Masala Podcast, for a while now, and we were able to meet up in person for the first time a month ago.
Month ago.
I can't remember, but we did meet up in person, and we have a lot of things, shared things in common. So I'm going to introduce her first before we go on. There we go. I'm just getting my Google form out, so I've got all the places available. So the topic of our conversation today is sexuality as a South Asian woman, and woman with an X there, because of course not everybody born with a vulva is a woman, and not everybody who is a woman has a vulva. So Sangeeta is a podcaster, activist, and speaker. She's the founder of South Asian feminist network Soul Sutras, which is all about tackling taboos within the culture. She's a creator of Masala Podcast, silver winner at the British Podcast Awards 2021 and 20, is it 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and also a winner of Spotify's SoundUp 2018. Sangeeta is also the creator of the Masala Monologues series of writing workshops and theatre shows in the UK and the US. She's been featured on BBC Radio London, Evening Standard, Cosmopolitan, Eastern Eye, Huffington Post, BBC Asian Radio, Brown Girl magazine, and has been a writer for over 20 years. And I will share all her relevant links in various places. I really want you to follow her, especially the upcoming series 3 of Masala Podcast as well. So welcome, Sangeeta. I'm so happy to have you
Hey,
here.
I'm so happy to be here, Lucy. Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm a huge fan of what you do, Lucy. And I think
Yay.
your kind of almost brand of kind of inclusive, warm, sex positivity messages, I think is what we need more in the world.
Oh, thank you.
And I think it's wonderful. And I kind of have seen you on social media, and obviously we met in person, and you're exactly the same in person as you are on, on social media, which is wonderful, which you rarely see.
Mhm.
So thank you for having me.
Awesome. So our talk today, it's a talk interview interactive thing because we're doing this live on Facebook. So if you are watching this live, do chime in with a comment, do say hi. Bear in mind that I am the DJ and the interviewer of this, so I may not get back to all of your comments in time. I will try to make sure if you say anything specific or ask anything specific that we get round to it as well. And we're talking today about sexuality as a South Asian woman, being mindful that as we are talking, that I'm a white middle class, well-spoken, southern middle class, well-spoken woman. And I really want to be mindful of that fact when we're talking about um, feminism, activism, and sexuality, that it's not one size fits all. And we were talking about this before we headed on live here, is that as much as everybody experiences sexual shame, no matter what culture or country you come from, it's pretty ubiquitous in every country. At the same time, there's different levels and different flavors on it. And especially as white women or white cisgendered women, and generally white cisgendered heterosexual women, people that we present as, we need to be really mindful that we don't start waving the flag of feminism thinking that one size fits all and basically trampling over everybody else, which is what we've done really well so far. I'm saying that sarcastically. And so I want to bring this into the conversation that also I find that, when I work with clients from loads of different countries in the world, and I still have to be really mindful of the energy I bring in that there are certain things that are accessible to me that aren't accessible to other people. And I really hope we can bring that into the dialogue today without also, I hope that Sangeeta explains it much more eloquently than I do. So I'm really excited to jump into this.
So I think as we were speaking, Lucy, before we started, it's really important. So we're sitting here, I'm in London, you're in Brighton, and the opportunities and the avenues that are open to us as feminists and people operating in the sexual wellness kind of space is a privilege. And I think
Mm.
it's important for us to kind of think about other women in other parts of the world. Like I was one of them. I grew up in India in a very traditional Indian family. Um, and shame around body and sex starts very, very early.
Mm.
Like one of the first words we learn as kids is chi chi in Hindi. Chi chi is dirty. So
Oh.
if you say you're a child and you've taken your clothes off and you've come out of the bathroom, your mother will say, chi chi, go back in there.
Mm.
That's shame about your body. And particularly as women, like every time I'd step out of my home in Mumbai, somebody would grope me. Like this was normal. This wasn't even like, oh, had a cup of tea and I got groped today. It was that
Mm-hmm.
commonplace.
Oh
So
my God.
like living as a woman in a woman's body in a lot of countries in the world is dangerous on an everyday basis.
Mm.
um, and not to kind of devalue some of the things we fight for in this country, we are, but every time you step out of your house, you could be raped, you could be killed. This
Mm.
is commonplace.
Yeah.
um, for some women, feminism is about being able to go out into the world without being attacked and make enough money to feed their kids.
Mm.
And so we've got to, I think, at all points try as much as is possible to keep these different narratives in our mind
Mm.
when we talk about sexuality, when we talk about feminism, when we talk about opportunities.
Yeah.
So obviously we are limited. We can only do what we can do. We can't change the entire world.
Yeah.
But I think to be mindful that other women come from other places and other spaces and do not have what we have,
Yeah.
I think is a good place to start. Um, I try and bring it up in a lot of conversations that I'm in. So if I'm on a panel and I'm talking among a panel of feminists, I'll say, but think about other women, think about what they go through.
Mm.
Um, and let's try and make this dialogue as inclusive as is possible for us to be, I think.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the word inclusion is being thrown around a lot at the moment. And again, that opens up a whole new can of
Yeah.
worms. And I want, especially this talk that we're having today, to be more of it's a conversation in that often when we are talking about, I say not talking about inclusion, I sound like another generic white person. It's more, one thing I've learned is the concept of shut up and listen. And I think we need to be doing a lot more of that. And it's something that I really embrace in that as much as I want to change the world and we all want to change the world, actually we get there much quicker by doing it with everybody. So what about I'm here to paint my specific part on the wall and I want to help you and give you that space so you can paint your part on the wall. And generally we're going to get the job done much more effectively when we all paint parts on the wall and know that no one person has all the answers and we can all provide different perspectives. And again, we need to be so mindful that, for me as a white woman and a lot of the white woman narrative, which can be really shouty and really like, I'm speaking for feminism and women's empowerment, and that's it. So we've got a few questions here that we're going to be diving into at the same time. I know that we end up kind of riffing about lots of things as well. So I want to jump straight in here. So, like, one of the questions is why is sex and sexuality more complicated in South Asian culture?
So in traditional South Asian culture, which is what I've grown up in, and a lot of people who might be second or third generation in the UK, um, the messages we receive from a very young age as women is sex isn't for us, sex is for men.
Mm.
Women kind of get married and they provide sex to the husband. These are kind of very old ideas. And even if, and the idea of us having autonomy over our bodies isn't a traditional idea.
Yeah.
Like we were never supposed to, and I just say this couple of 100 years, it's not, we'll talk about kind of historically, but that's
Mm.
not true. But traditionally, you get married, husband wants sex, you kind of lie there and think of India, like that's, or England, whichever, you want to think about.
I don't think of India. Lie there and think of any country.
Any country, whichever you want, But the point being that, owning pleasure, owning our bodies, owning our sexuality isn't really allowed space in our culture. So when you come from there, and women are traditionally shamed if you kind of have sex outside of marriage, if you talk about sexual pleasure, it's a very shameful thing, and that shame is kind of carried across generations. Your mum felt it, her mother felt it, and it's things we carry in our body. So the important thing for me when I work with the women that I work with within my culture, it's to acknowledge that, to say, yes, I know these are the messages you've received, but they are no longer true. They were never true. You were just told they were true.
Yeah.
Because patriarchal structures want to keep you in a place where you don't question anything, you don't ask any questions, you don't say, hang on a minute, what about me? It doesn't serve patriarchy for that to happen.
Yeah.
And also, I think, while these kind of very restrictive ideas of sex and sexuality is very much part of South Asian culture to this day, historically, that's not been the case. So we're the people that created the Kama Sutra. 4th century BC, we were talking about female orgasms and, sex toys and, all kinds of things. But somewhere along the line, we've lost that. And now it's this shame-ridden, women, female kind of repressive kind of culture. I always talk about the fact that, yes, so 4th century BC, we were talking about the female orgasm, and now we rape women on buses. So that it's a journey. So I think it's very complicated for us because we carry the shame in our bodies. We carry the shame in our DNA almost. So then to go from there and to say, yes, husband, boyfriend, whatever, I would like an orgasm, is a long journey. It's very complicated. Or even to myself to say, I deserve to feel pleasure. I can give myself pleasure. I can give myself permission to feel good. Is very, very complicated.
Yeah. And, I absolutely agree. Shame lives in the body, and it lives in the body of every single person, whatever gender and whatever culture or ethnicity you come from. And yeah, it's almost like there's that baseline of shame. And then we get to add extra stuff on top.
Yeah.
And it's, even when I'm working with, because I tend to work with a lot of European or American women. And then generally, there's always that layer of shame, especially as I tend to attract people who come from faith backgrounds as well. So there's that extra dollop of shame. But then it's, generally when we come from westernized countries and we're brought up there, born there, our families are from there, there's still that level of, say, liberalism, modernization that we have, that's kind of taken for granted, that's kind of implicit, that we haven't had to process, that often makes processing the shame, I don't want to say easier, because I've worked with clients where it's still really difficult, but it's like there's not that layer, there's not that obstacle in the road for you. There's all sorts of other obstacles in the road, but that one isn't there. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I think one other thing I wanted to add was that for South Asian women, we not only carry shame for ourselves, we carry the shame of the entire family.
Yeah.
So if you've done something that you are told reflects badly on your family, say you're having more sex than you should, or outside of marriage or whatever, you are told that your actions have repercussions on your entire family.
Yeah.
So can you imagine the pressure and the weight of that?
Yeah. And it's like, with the women that I work with, there's still there is that fear there, but it's unconscious. And it's easy for me to say, it's absolute bullshit, it's not true. But the thing is, for a lot of South Asian women, it actually is true.
It's true.
It is true.
Like when they say your family's going to kick you out, they do kick you out. Nobody will ever speak to you again.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine your entire family never speaking to you again because you've done something that doesn't connect with their code of conduct or whatever it is,
Yeah,
it's a real
exactly.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's also dependent and something about what affects us as humans, whether it's our sexuality, our psychology, everything about us is also influenced by everyone around us. We are a mixture of biopsycho and there's a biopsychosocial model. So we're not just our biology, we're not just what we inherited, we're not just our psychological tendencies. We are also the mix of what we have learned from the people that we have been, the people that raise us, the people that we grew up around. We are really the result of the people that we hang around with. And you can say, well, I'm an independent thinker. You probably are, but we can't help by being influenced by the people around us. And if the predominant culture of what you are surrounded with is one thing, you can't escape that no matter
Yeah,
how liberal
yeah,
minded you are, no matter how rebellious you are. You don't escape it. It's still there, just often
absolutely,
unconscious.
absolutely. And it's a lot harder because you're really fighting, and you're conscious of all the things you're giving up if you go down a certain path, you
Yeah.
know?
So, what are some of the ways that we can overcome the taboo around sex? I guess, especially in
Uh,
South Asian culture.
yeah, it's hard, but it's possible.
Mm.
Um, I think first by going back to our own culture and looking at historically what our culture is. Where do some of these ideas come from? Because what we're told is that this is who we are, South Asians, this is our culture, but actually it isn't.
Yeah.
Look at the goddesses.
Mm.
They are fierce, and Kali is one of the goddesses. You don't like, she doesn't like what you say, she cuts your head off.
Yeah.
Like that's where we come from. That's our
Yeah.
culture. The Kama Sutra is our culture, and that's just one book. There are 6 such books that I think I know of. There's another one called Anangaranga, which is all
Mm.
similar. It's about kind of sex as one of the basic concepts of life, um, as one of the arts. Karma, which is sex, sexual desire, is one of the arts required to live in the world. Like it's that fundamental.
Mm.
So that's where we come from. Artha Kama, so which is Artha is about making money, so there's like yoga is about kind of, as you know, yoga, what that is. So Kama is that important.
Mm.
So that's our culture. We were taught that all of these had to be in balance to live a good, fulfilled life,
Mm.
right? Um, so when somebody says that's our culture, to stand up and say, hang on a minute, actually, it isn't our
Mm.
culture. It is just a version of a recent version of our culture. And I think then to also forgive people, because sometimes say, it's often women oppressing women also in South Asian culture.
Yeah.
But to be forgiven, to say they don't know any better. They were taught that, so they're just passing it on. And also to go back into our own bodies and to say, I was born with this infinite um, power to feel pleasure, right? This infinite source of pleasure is within me. And to sort of go to that and try and work with that and reconnect to that slowly. It's not easy, as you know from your own work with the women that you work with. That's not easy. It's easy for us to sit here and say, yeah, go and connect with your pleasure. But if
It,
you've had years and years and years of being shamed around it, it's very difficult but to start small.
I agree
um
with that. And I agree that, you know, the way that generally humans learn things and we integrate things is it has to start with cognitive awareness and information. So it's what I say to everyone is read all the books, listen to the podcast, because even though you feel that you can't get it out of here and into your body, this is where it starts.
yeah,
And the more that you start to absorb that information, the more you start to change that narrative, that's when it can begin to trickle down. And also, as you said, be patient with yourself as much as you can. And I also say that it can feel really overwhelming when we
yeah,
start that process. Like, oh my
yeah,
God, there's just like a massive mountain that I will never
yeah,
overcome.
yeah,
But I actually love what you say, which is similar to what I say, which is actually what if you could come back to that foundational belief and knowing that my body is hardwired for pleasure,
the
pleasure.
pressure of pleasure.
prayer of pleasure. Freudian slip there. But my body is hardwired for pleasure, and it's part of my life force. And that can be a really deep sense of knowing that can help to start to override or rewrite those scripts in our head that end up living in our bodies.
Absolutely. And also to kind of couple of things. I think I love what you said about being overwhelmed. I think sometimes when we look at the messages, particularly in the sex positivity space, everybody's talking about like, right, orgasm, sex toys, da 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 da. It's all this happening. And if you're not in that space, you can go in there and say, oh my God, there's all this stuff happening. But, I don't feel any of this. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's their journey.
Yeah.
Each of us is on our own individual journey. And our pleasure can be this and someone else's can be that. And they're equally valid, I think.
Yeah.
So I think to allow ourselves to feel whatever it is we want to feel and to go as far or as not far as we want to go, I think.
And also because a lot of the sex positive spaces are very white dominated. There's a lot more movement now. There's like my friend Jeanette Davis, who has, it used to be called Scarlet Ladies, now it's called Sunder and Beam. That's just one organization, but there's a lot more movement towards, say, decentralizing white folk at the center of sex positivity, because also it actually broadens our perspective of what sex positivity is. And also, again, like any movement, any culture becomes homogenous. That's kind of how humans are. And I agree that a lot of the sex positive world can have that kind of one vibe, even without meaning to.
Yeah.
So it's constantly expanding that awareness. And I really agree with that feeling of going into a space and be like, oh my God, they're talking about dildos and orgasms, and they had 5 orgasms this week. I'm not at that state yet. So you end up thinking, well, that's not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've heard this, I think Jeanette was telling me in an interview I did with her last year, that for a lot of women who aren't white, where you can end up feeling really overwhelmed in that space, because it's like, well, I heard her saying that, oh, well, that's just for white women. It's not for people like me.
Exactly.
And yeah.
And I hear that as a lot of, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No, go on.
I hear a lot of this, oh, that's not for us, as an idea. Because when that looks so different to our experience, our cultural experience, our own kind of, stuff that we carry, it's very difficult then to connect to that. And again, I don't think a lot of sex positive kind of positivity spaces are, putting people away. But I think it's just, if you have one voice saying one thing, it becomes the dominant voice, then it's very difficult to get something different out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I say the sex positivity space, I mean, there's a culture in itself. It tries to pride itself on being inclusive, and it does try to be like any space. And yeah, we do need to acknowledge that. It's the same, when we talk about the tantric conscious sexuality world, and that's probably another conversation we can have. We talked about this when we met in London. We both have opinions on the world of Tantra, especially as the tantric world is very white dominated as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, so it's that it was something that I love when I, being a sexologist, and the training that I had in the community that I not grew up in terms of like my professional community that I was nurtured in. It was this constant message of the way that we understand and perceive sexuality is diverse, and it has to be, and we have to keep expanding our own understanding and constantly confronting our own biases. And that's generally how we grow as sexologists and people as well.
While you were talking, I was thinking about what might be some ways that we might go back to that place or that source of pleasure. And it could be something as simple as an oil massage. I was thinking of what are Asian things. And for Diwali, I gave myself a warm oil massage in the morning. It's traditionally what you do on Diwali morning, like sesame seed oil. You warm it up and your mom gives you a nice massage, and then you go have a bath and you put your Diwali new clothes on, right? It's a traditional thing. But even that can be pleasurable, right? Giving yourself a warm massage on a cold day is pleasurable. And there are so many practices within Indian culture, South Asian culture, Some of the courtesans used to, there's something called dhoop, which is sort of like incense. It's like a
Mhm.
stronger form of dhoop. So they'd lift up their skirts and stand over the dhoop, and that would then be fragrance. Isn't that amazing? Before they went to sort of, about their business, whatever it is they were doing
Oh
that day.
my God, I love that.
Isn't
Like
that
having
so sexy? It's like, rare. There we go. I'm gonna,
a, per-
perfume myself for
a
my lover.
perfume, a perfume vulva. I mean,
Perfume vulva.
I was just like the whole. I love that idea, and it's
Yeah.
I'm also thinking, I guess it was burning. I guess it was something
It's
lit. It's
yeah.
like you're standing above it, so
Yeah.
it's
It's
warm. It's
warm. It's
oh,
like a little cone. So it's sort of like this. It's like that small.
hmm
And it's like a triangle, and you light it, and it smokes really a
hmm
lot. And you sort of take it around your house. So traditionally, it's supposed to clear out the energy. But I've read and I've seen in a movie as well where she sort of lifts her skirt up and just sort of sits on it, and then just takes the skirt off and she walks off. And I was like, "Oh, that's cool, man! I love that." So
I
all of
love
these are
that.
from South Asian culture.
Yeah,
The oil massages, the hair massages, the dhoop. These are all things in our culture. So it doesn't have to be all like dildos and orgasms if that's not your thing. It can be. Go have orgasms, buy dildos, whatever. But I'm saying that there are other ways to do this. There
I
are
agree.
ways within our own culture, whatever that might be, to explore your sources of pleasure.
I must just say that didn't you say that in India before the white Christians came? I'm sure did you say that you had there were sex toys available? Like dildos have been
Yeah,
humans have been making dildos
yes.
for a very long time.
They're mentioned in the Kama Sutra. They are sex
Yeah,
toys in the Kama Sutra. This is 4th century BC,
yeah,
right? So they've existed.
exactly. I'm thinking that, I'm getting inspired here about all different sex toy manufacturers. There must be like a niche sex toy manufacturer that because you can get all sorts of dildos nowadays, like artisan dildos. There must be a manufacturer somewhere making more authentic. Maybe there's like a manufacturer making like authentic Indian dildos.
That would be pretty awesome.
That would be pretty awesome. Getting sidetracked here. My enthusiasm for dildos. Um, and so I was thinking one of the other questions is what are some useful ways to think about why we might carry shame about sex? I know we've talked about that already,
Yeah.
but do you have any other thoughts on that
Yeah.
as to why we carry it?
So it might be so much of this subconscious, as you were saying earlier, Lucy. We 95% of our kind of thinking is subconscious, right? It's things we've grown up around. What our parents have said, what uncles and aunties might have said. And these are messages we've picked up. But I think the thing to think about now is, does this serve me?
Yeah.
Does a message that was given to me when I was 5 years old by somebody who didn't live in this time and day and age, how does that serve me?
Hmm.
So I think it's literally to sort of, when there's that voice in your head that says, I don't know, for example, good women don't do that. For example, I'm just saying, right? And then you're like, okay, but hang on a minute, where does that come from?
Hmm.
And is that really true?
Hmm.
And a lot of times we find that that isn't true. It's something we've picked up and we've kind of taken on to conditioning. It's things maybe are, for women particularly, it's what our mothers have said,
Hmm.
but they are products of their time and they're
Yeah.
product of their conditioning. They couldn't escape that. Like my mom, had a very sad life. She didn't have a choice. So she had to do what she had to do. I have a choice.
Hmm.
So I think it's always to remind ourselves that those messages of shame that we carry, which are sometimes genetic, almost passed down,
Yeah.
they
If
are
you
not
follow
our
the field,
fault,
yeah. If you follow the
then
field of epigenetics, then yeah.
exactly, we carry that. But it's not our fault.
Hmm.
It isn't true. A lot of it isn't true. So to really start investigating it and to go to what feels right for you, really at
Hmm.
your core. We talk about root chakras and things like, what does that feel like? And we know a lot of the times. I think we just start to question ourselves and add a layer of doubt, particularly as women, because we've been told not to trust ourselves.
Yeah.
You obviously don't know anything, so
And defer
uh,
to the opinion of others.
exactly,
And it's also something
exactly.
I learned through the work of Kimberly Ann Johnson is that generally, as women or people, I say socialized as women, born as women with estrogen based systems, that our social nervous systems are more different in that, as I say, as women, the way that we are socialized and how much is biology, how much is socialization, it's mixed. But we are generally wired to be more, say, socially engaged. We are generally wired to be more emotionally aware of others.
Yeah.
And it's literally wired into us. How much of it was upbringing, how much of it's biological, it's so from so many different places. So we have to really be mindful of that.
Yeah.
So this is kind of, I say, my default. This is what my system is wired to do. So it's not that we can talk. I know that I've been in the coaching space for a while, and there's a lot of memes and talk around, trust yourself, boundaries, don't take on other people's opinions. And that is helpful, but then you end up beating yourself up thinking, why am I still doing this?
Yeah.
And actually remembering, well, oops, you just hit my laptop there. Part of it is ingrained. So we just
Yeah.
have to be mindful of it
Exactly.
and give ourselves some kindness and compassion there.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key, to be compassionate to yourself and to say that this is going to be hard. Some of it's going to be hard. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know?
And the final question is, where are we? What are some ways of, I say, what are some ways of thinking about sex that are no longer useful to us in 2021? But more, what do we want to throw out? What
Yeah.
ways of thinking about sex, especially in South Asian culture, do you want to throw out? Do we want everyone to throw out and say, yeah, that was so 10 years ago. We're leaving that out and we're moving forwards now.
I think a few things in our culture, I think in South Asian culture, this idea that sex is for men and not for women. And it's so ingrained, even second, third generation women with amazing jobs and careers and outfits and whatever, what smart women um, internalize some of that, and it does not serve us.
Yeah.
We are wired to feel pleasure a lot more. We are built to feel pleasure in so many levels that men aren't even there yet. So to remember that our body is capable of all of that, and to
Yeah.
throw out this idea that somehow you're performing, performative sex, it's for a man and it's nothing to do with you, and you're just the kind of passive recipient of it.
Yeah.
I think we just need to chuck it out.
Yeah.
It maybe was something that served people 50 years ago. It doesn't anymore. In
It was
arranged
useful.
marriages, it was useful then.
It's useful for procreation terms.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
it. But we don't
Exactly.
usually have sex or engage in sexuality just to have babies.
Exactly. But that's another idea in Indian culture, actually, in South Asian culture, that sex is for procreation. Like that's the only purpose of it.
Mm.
And the other thing I'd like us to really get rid of is the shame around sex, the shame around feeling sexual, feeling too much, asking for too much. These are all loaded with shame in South Asian culture.
Mm.
And I'd love to get rid of it and chuck it like into outer space so nobody had to ever deal with it.
I mean, I really believe that, sexual shame, I mean, it's at the root of so much when it comes to sexual violence, when it comes to
Yeah,
aggression. And
yeah.
and it's interesting that when you were saying that as women we generally are capable of more pleasure than men. Well, actually, I believe all humans are. We just need to
Mm,
learn how.
mm,
In that, in the different spaces I've been, I love when coaches teach men how to have multiple
mm,
orgasms and energetic orgasms, that you can have orgasmic experiences through your nipples.
mm,
And actually, it's as humans, we all have these thousands of nerve endings and
mm,
wiring for pleasure and
mm.
eroticism and being orgasmic. And I love this idea that we're not just letting go of the shame of sexuality, but we're embracing sexual energy as something beautiful and
Yeah,
powerful. And how can we harness it?
absolutely.
And how far would we go with sexual violence, with gender violence, with all of the shadow icky stuff that can come? What would happen when we start to transmute that? What are the potentials? That's another big philosophical question that won't be solved tonight. It's
That's beautiful, though. That is absolutely beautiful.
And one final thing I want to say, and I hope that we might chime in on this, is that It's why we need more voices like you and more, I say, South Asian women or people, South Asian folk. I say we need more of them. There are loads of you already, but it's more stepping back and helping to give you more of a space. Because again, there's so much I can say as a white woman talking about what I talk about. But this is why we have the concept of we do need everybody painting on the wall.
Mm.
We need more spaces for South Asian women to be talking openly around sexuality, because that's going to go much further than just me on my soapbox and other people on their soapboxes as well. And it's not going to be easy. It's not an easy task. It's not an easy journey. There will be, and there already is a lot of pushback from patriarchy in general. But I really hope we can get there.
I think we are on route.
We're en route, especially, thanks to social media,
Yeah.
which is a blessing and a curse, and has a light and a shadow. But because of TikTok, more people are finding out about things. It's why I have more hope for younger generations who are doing so much to change the narratives around sexuality. So we just have to help be there to show them. Well, no, be there to shine a light and say, here it is.
Yeah.
And then,
And then they find their path. Yes.
exactly. This has
Yeah.
been so lovely to connect with you. Do you have anything that you want to share with my audience, anything that's coming up that you want them to know about?
Just follow our work, support non-mainstream voices that are in this space. Check out my podcast, go to Masala Podcast, have a listen, follow the women that I interview on the show. So it's not just about me. Each episode is about an amazing South Asian woman that's doing incredible things.
Yeah.
There's a South Asian porn star, there's somebody who works in HIV, there's incredible women. So just, show us love, support us.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions or there's anybody that wants to engage one-to-one, please feel free to reach out. That's what we're here for. I'm here, and so is Lucy, I think.
Exactly. And I do welcome your comments and your feedback, because this is how we keep the conversation going. And I truly believe that by us having these kinds of conversations through interviews, through podcasts, through any kind of media, people listen. And sometimes it can be that thing that starts you on a different course of your life. I truly believe that. We can all think of either a video or a movie or a book that changed our lives or that changed the trajectory of our life. So this is my hope and my intention, that we can all stand at the wall painting different parts of the wall using that metaphor. Anyway, so thank you so much, Sangeeta.
Thank you so much. It's been an
Brilliant.
absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Right, so thank you so much. So I'm going to stop the recording. There we go.